Good evening. We are back to the study of the Spirit's book. We are on book 4, Hopes and Consolations, chapter 1, Earthly Joys and Sorrows. And last week we started Fear of Death. And there are only 2 questions in this sub-item. And we did only the first one, 941, but in order for us to discuss 942, we have to read 941 again, otherwise it doesn't make much sense. So I'll ask Philip to read 941 and 942, and then we talk about it, okay? Thanks, Philip.
Fear of death. The fear of death perplexes many. Where does this fear come from in people if they have before them the whole future? This fear is misplaced, but what do you expect? People have been thoroughly brainwashed since childhood to believe in heaven and hell, and who have retained this belief, along with the notion that most likely they will go to the latter, because whatever belongs to human life is a mortal sin for the soul, are understandably fearful. However, most people who are indoctrinated at an early age manage to throw it aside when they grow up, i.e., if they are capable of forming a little judgment. They become atheists or materialists because they are unable to accept it. Thus, the natural effect, though unintentional, of such teaching is to make people believe that there is nothing beyond this present life. People who persist in their mistaken childhood beliefs fear eternal fire that burns without destroying. Death should not instill fear in virtuous persons because, with faith, they have the certainty of a future life. Hope leads them to expect a better life than the present one, and charity, which has guided their actions, gives them the assurance that they will not encounter anyone that they may have reason to dread in the spirit world. Materialistic people, more attracted by physical life than by spiritual one, only know material pains and pleasures. The only happiness they feel is in fleeting satisfaction of desires. Their minds, constantly occupied with the difficulties of the present life and painfully affected by them, are tortured with perpetual anxiety. For such individuals, the thought of death is terrifying because of doubts about the future and because they have to leave all their feelings and hopes behind when they leave Earth. Spiritually minded people who have raised themselves above the artificial wants created by the passions experiences a joy that is unknown to the carnally minded, even in this lower life. The moderation of their desires calms their spirits and gives them serenity. Happy in the good they do, life has no disappointments for them, and its upsets glide over their consciousness lightly, without leaving any painful impression. 942. Some persons may find this advice somewhat mundane. Won't they see them as being commonplace and hackneyed truths? Won't they say that the true secret to happiness is being able to endure one's misfortunes? Many people adopt this view, but some are similar to individuals who fall ill and demand to be cured without changing their habits. Although their physicians prescribe corrective diets, they continue the indulgences that aggravated their condition in the first place.
Thanks, Phil. So when I talk about fear of death, we discussed this last week a little bit, that many people fear death either for what they have believed through religions that they are going to end up in heaven or hell or purgatory, and most people, knowing their own limitations, believe they are going to end up either in purgatory or hell, right? So that's why they fear that. Or the materialistic ones that believe that life ends with the end of the physical life, fear death because it's the end of everything, and nobody is very comfortable with thinking that everything will end and nothing will exist after it. But also, we have to consider, because you find fear of death among spiritists, the fear of the unknown, right? When you are, like we said last week, when you are moving to a new place, a new country, a new town, a new city, you have a little bit of anxiety, of a fear of the unknown, what you're going to find. And of course, here, nowadays, you can find all the information available about the place you are going to live, but still, it is a sometimes traumatic experience to move to a different place. About life in the spiritual world, Spiritism is the philosophy, the doctrine that brings most of the information about life in the spiritual world. You'll find in some other spiritualist beliefs information about the spiritual world, but it is confusing in other places, and it is very uncertain in a sense. So the majority of the population have the fear of death that comes, again, starts with our instinctive defense mechanism that we develop since the animal phase, right? Or even the vegetable phase, which is the defending yourself against the end of your physical life. And that carries when we become humans, right? So the first instinct is to try to avoid death. And when we start rationalizing it, then we add the fear of the unknown. And what happens to many spirits, primitive spirits, when they discarnate, they stay around the place they lived because they are so afraid of not understanding and moving somewhere else that they stick to what they know, and they end up around their place they lived until they come to a new reincarnation. You find that information in the book Evolution in Two Worlds by André Luiz. The second question, Kardec asks about if this is not very nonsensical or mundane, and the spirits answer that they compare to those that go to the doctor and to ask to be cured, but do not follow the prescriptions, right? Continue to live in their lives. And this is what is this? Is just knowing about life in the spiritual world does not alleviate our fears if we do not put in practice on our daily lives the teachings about what we learn. Because if we are afraid of going to the spiritual world, going back to the spiritual world, afraid of death, because we are not sure where we are going to end, and we are afraid we're going to end up in a not so nice place, the best way to avoid that, according to what we learn in Spiritism, is to improve ourselves morally, right? And by improving ourselves morally, we are going to find ourselves in a better place when we go back to the spiritual world. But we learn intellectually, but we avoid or drag to put in practice in our daily lives to become part of who we are. And that creates anxiety and fear of death, because if we know that we are supposed to do something to go to a better place, and we look at ourselves and we see that we are not doing it, that also can create fear of death naturally, right? Okay, I think that's it for fear of death. Any questions, comments?
I think, Jerome, I have a comment. I think part of depending on how I was thinking about this, depending on how was your last experience on the spiritual world, you may unconsciously you may have that image or like fear of how you experience your last time in the spiritual world, like even depending how you have to incarnate. I think part of that remembrance might be pushing you or creating that fear.
I agree. I think that's a very good point also, because of course our life in this, our last passage in the spiritual world is imprinted in our subconscious. We don't remember, but it's there, and it can generate this unconscious fear of going back to the place we were. We know that we are always progressing, but the progress generally is very little in the life, in one incarnation. So there are good chances that if we don't work on ourselves, we are going to end up exactly where we left, and that can create this fear. It's a very good point, Eugene.
And just one more, I think for many of us, spiritism will come to like as a remedy, right? Like if you have that fear unconscious, when you find spiritism and you start understanding what you can do now to actually go to a better place, that's your sort of like your antidote, right? To that fear. And I think many of us might be going through that phase now of understanding, okay, now I know what I can do now, so I can actually be in a better place when I go back.
Yeah, but knowing what you can do now, that doesn't mean you are going to do it. Yeah, so that's the problem that we have to address, right? So, but I think we as spiritists, we need to use what we know and to prepare ourselves. And a lot of people, I mentioned this last week, a lot of people do not really have fear of death. They fear the process, right? The suffering through the process of death. And that's what a lot of people talk about being afraid of. And it's a valid point also, because nobody wants to suffer, nobody likes to suffer. So the perspective of going through that can be scary, and that's what a lot of people fear. Okay. All right, so we're going to talk about suicide now. It's always a very difficult subject. We are 1 month in advance because September is the suicide prevention month, the month that yellow month, but that's where we are. It's the 10th how you saw the 10th largest case of deaths in the US presently is suicide. You have in the world, you have one suicide every very little, I don't remember exactly the number, I don't want to say a number but it's, you have one person committing suicide every minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, something like that. And for every successful suicide, there are 3 unsuccessful attempts at suicide that sometimes leave permanent damage, leave traumatic damage. Every successful suicide directly affects the life of 6 other people. So whenever someone is committing suicide, it's directly affecting the life on average of 6 other people. So all of these are statistics that is important for us to understand when we are going to discuss it. Again, we are going to discuss it according to what the spirits brings to us. And like all deaths, all reincarnations are different from each other. all suicide cases are different from each other. Responsibility, consequences, each one is different from the others. Okay, so there's no way of saying that all suicides go to this place or that place, because that's not true. They all go to different experiences according to their to their experience. I was just reading 2 cases in the Spiritist Review, one in 1858 and one in 1862. That suicide spirit communicating through mediums, and the Kardec talking to them, or other dialoguers talking to them, and the 2 cases are completely different. One, both repentant, but one suffering a lot, and one kind of not regretting having committed suicide, still struggling, knowing the difficulties, but not regretting it. So it's interesting. You see the different cases in the book Heaven and Hell. You have the cases of suicide that are very interesting and worth reading if someone wants to go a little deeper into the topic. Okay. All right. So let's go.
943.
Yes.
What causes the distaste of life that sometimes takes hold of people without any discernible reason? Idleness, lack of faith, and often satiety. When people use their abilities in pursuit of some useful aim that is in line with their natural aptitudes, their work is not dull. Life passes quickly, and they are able to bear the reversals of life patiently and with resignation. They look forward to a more solid and lasting happiness in the future.
Yeah, there is one correction there that I made here: lack of faith. I think it's written lack of, I don't remember what was written there in the book, but it's lack of faith.
Distaste for life. Oh no, sorry, wrong line.
Lack of conviction. Yeah, it's not. It's lack of faith that is in the original French. So the spirits are giving us 3 basic reasons for people to get unhappy in life, or bored in life, or looking for causes of suicide, which is idleness, right? Because if you are not doing anything useful, you end up creating disturbing thoughts and associating with disturbing spirits. Lack of faith, of course, if you believe in God, and you believe in progress in our spiritual nature, and understanding our destiny as eternal spirits, it's going to prevent you from being inclined to commit suicide. And satiety, which is, being what's the definition of satiety, Billy?
I don't remember.
It's being, I forgot now the explanation in English. Sorry. Anyway, someone can, Laura, Carol, can anyone help me here?
Perhaps it would be striving beyond and beyond the minimum needs. It's like going overboard. It would be having extreme ideas about how to be satisfied. And, probably it would be taken not on a mental level, but it could be perhaps a physical encounter or a physical experience of that.
Actually, it's feeling of state of being beyond gratified to or beyond capacity. Yeah. Overindulgence or excess, revulsion or disgust caused by overindulgence or excess. Yeah. Yeah. So what the spirits tells us here is that when we are doing something useful with our lives, we have less reason to feel frustration and impulses of ending our lives earlier. Again, we're talking here about people that are in a normal state of mind, within the normal range, right? Because of course there are extreme cases, and we are going to look at it. People that are extremely unbalanced through mental diseases, and that can commit suicide out of imbalances, and that's, we're going to discuss this later. Here we're talking about people living their normal lives, what drives them to think about committing suicide, and these are the three main factors that the spirits bring us. And of course, when you are unhappy with your life, it's because you are not doing something that helps you and that motivates you, right? One thing that I recently heard a lot mentioned by this spirited speaker is that sometimes we try to find reasons in our lives in people that cannot give us back, and that can cause a lot of pain and suffering. We need to learn not to depend on what others gives to us. And if we are, let's say, a mother that has an ungrateful son or daughter and keeps trying to extract love out of a son or a daughter that is not prepared to or interested in giving back the love that the mother wants. So she can be completely unhappy and be driven to something like this. And the recommendation is you need to find something in life that gives you meaning, right? And that it's different from each one of us. Some people volunteer in a hospital, and that fulfills them. Some people volunteers at orphanage or taking care of children. Some people volunteer on other charitable workers. Some people find a work that they like, an artist or painting or music, but you need to find something that fulfills your life, and you cannot depend on others to fulfill your life if that's not happening. Of course, we are always looking for connections, and always we need companions. It's an important part of our life. But if we look for something that fulfills our life, that gives meaning to our life, we are going to end up finding people with similar interests in those places, doing similar things that are going to become better companions for ourselves, that we are going to be able to take advantage of these companies. Of course, you are never going to be able to completely fulfill the whole left by, let's say, a son or a daughter that is ungrateful to you. That's something that is going to stay with you. But that cannot be the reason that you are going to start thinking about committing suicide, that you're going to start thinking about your life has no meaning or anything like that. Because in the end, it's an individual journey. We need to evolve by ourselves. And with that, we cannot completely depend on other people to bring us happiness, because then if we are looking for happiness in external factors, we are going to frequently fail to find it. So we need to find a way, and some people have trouble believing in God, for instance. It's not for them. Religious is not for them. But there are people that are not religious and live a very good life, fulfilling their lives with useful activities that helps humanity. So it is always possible. Again, there is psychological, psychiatric, medicine help for those that are struggling beyond the natural struggles that we have on our daily lives. And we have to use all our resources available, spiritual, medical, physical, to avoid falling into these temptations. Okay. Great comments, questions? Okay, this next one is very important.
944. Do human beings have the right to dispose of their own life? No, only God has that right. Voluntary suicide is a violation of God's law. Is suicide always voluntary? No. When a person undergoing a phase of insanity kills himself or herself, they have no real knowledge of the act being committed.
Two very important things here, right? First, according to Spiritism, according to what we learn in Spiritism, killing is against the natural law. Any killing. Killing others, killing ourselves, killing a baby that is being formed. So all this goes against the natural law, is a violation of God's law. So we have no right to dispose of our own lives according to the natural law. So if we choose that route, we're going to face the consequences. Every action has a reaction, cause and consequences. Now, it's interesting here that the Spirits say voluntary suicide is a violation of God's law. And Kardec immediately goes and asks, is suicide always voluntary? And the Spirit says, no, because when a person is going to a phase of insanity, it's not saying insane person. You can go through an insanity phase, kills oneself. They have no real knowledge of the act being committed. Isn't that going to create a consequence? Yes, it is, always creates a consequence. But it's a different consequence from someone that thinks, plans, and executes. Human laws, when you are judging someone that commits a crime, makes the difference between committing a code planned crime, right? And a crime committed in an act of not insanity, but impulse, right? There is different consequences according to human laws. So if according to human laws, there are different consequences, natural laws, of course, there are even more different consequences. So we have to understand that, again, it creates consequences. And if you commit suicide, you are going to have to go through the reparation. When we study Between Heaven and Earth on Sunday, this coming Sunday, we're going to talk about little Julio, right? That we're going to first meet him in the place that he is in the spiritual world. He died drowning. And Clarencio mentions very quickly that he tried to commit suicide by poisoning himself, and lost the ability to speak, but was saved by his colleagues. And when he regained conscience and was able to get out, killed himself, drowning himself. So what's the consequence? we're going to see on Sunday how he is. He's an 8-year-old boy facing the consequences of his previous actions in his previous life. So there are consequences always, right? But the consequences are according to our knowledge and intention. In the book Memoirs of a Suicide, which is the very basic book for us to understand what happens to suicides in the spiritual world, a hard book, very difficult book to read, very heavy for those that it's not an easy book to read, especially for those that lost a loved one through suicide. I never recommend that book, but you know, if someone is thinking about suicide, and you know, I recommend that book because it really scares you from what happens on the other side. But you see different cases with different consequences there, right? But also you see all the support and assistance that exists for suicides in the spiritual world, which is very important also because nobody is left alone ever. Now, the problem with the suicides is that when you commit suicide without believing that you are going to end everything, you know, the case that the first one that I talked about in the Spiritist Review of 1858, the guy committed suicide, but because he believed that it was the end of it, and he wasn't dead, right? He believed that he was still living, and he failed in his suicide attempt. So he was all confused, all struggling. The conversation when they asked him, "What about, you know, you killed yourself?" He said, "I did not. I'm alive. I failed in killing myself," which is, you know, can you imagine the confusion of a spirit like this, right? So again, each case is a case, and but there is always assistance. There is always help. Okay.
So Jean, when it's
John?
machines, to disconnect the machines from the person.
Help. The question is, yeah, the question is when it's okay to turn off the machine.
When two or more physicians document that any the artificial life support is futile, then without a artificial life support, that life will expire.
Yeah, but I have a friend whose mother is in the hospital right now, who's through the machine, but it's conscious.
She's conscious.
Yes,
She's conscious.
but
She knows what-
without
she
the
knows
machine,
what's
it's
going
not gonna survive.
Okay, so it's up to them to make a decision. To say, I want to turn off the machines, and if I survive, I survive. If I don't survive, I'm okay with that. That's not a suicide. That's not a suicide.
It's
A
difficult.
suicide would be, I wanted to give me a poison and I'll drink the poison in my hand. That's a suicide. What she's saying is say, turn off the machine. I'll leave the hands of that. Now, if you say, give me the poison, I'm gonna drink it, then you are making a decision. You take the decision upon yourself to end your life. If she's conscious, if she's aware, just like every we evaluate, and said that she's competent to make decisions, she can sign up to paper and say, I want to turn off the machines. And that's not a suicide. Now, different people will interpret it as a suicide, but it's not a suicide in the minds of most, because you are not taking your own life. You are living in the hands of God. If God wants me to survive, survive. I will endure the hardship of life. But I want to endure the hardship of life without artificial life support.
And again, artificial life support, right? That's important because nowadays, like I'm always saying, like you can preserve a physical body alive for as long as you want. So what is there to control? If you are going to go through the concept that you keeping the physical body alive, you're keeping the spirit connected, which is not the case. We're going to reach to a point that nobody's going to ever, no physical body will die, because we're going to be able to preserve all physical bodies, right? So we have to understand from the spiritual point of view when there is the end of the connection between the spirit and the physical body, which is the discarnation. It's not the death of the physical body. The separation of the spirit and the physical body is the discarnation. When there is no more brain activity in the physical body, then there is no connection. The spirit may be still loosely connected, but there is no way back. So there is it officially, according to the spirit, it's the death of the physical body, right? When you talk about artificial maintenance of life, you also have to draw a line, right? And when like I said, when the spirit is still, when the person is still alive and conscious, they make their own decisions. And the fact that you are choosing to not to perform extreme measures, it doesn't mean that you are killing the person or the person is committing suicide. You know, I have my godmother is 100 years old, right? And she fell 3-4 months ago. She fell, hit her head, and went to the hospital. We told the doctor, don't do extreme measures to save her life. She's 100 years old, right? You're going to do cause more harm than good trying to save her. And she survived. She's fine. But they never took extreme measures, right? So she was supposed to continue living. She's still living, right? So that's the point there. The extreme measures, again, if someone is 27 years old, you take all extreme measures to try to save a person's life, because person is strong enough to, if you succeed, to live a decent life. But when a person is 100 years old, you are going to harm more than do good, right? Which is also something that you have to consider, right? If you are going to do more harm than benefit, right? The person.
Well, thing to take into consideration is the individual and the intention of the individual. So if I right now am diagnosed with some kind of cancer and they offer me chemotherapy, I said, I do not want chemotherapy. The doctor says, without chemotherapy, you're gonna die. And I say, I want to live, I want to live without chemotherapy. It's not a suicide. But on the other hand, I have the same diagnosis, the same doctor offers me chemotherapy. And in my mind, I say, that's a good way. I want to die anyway. I really want to die. If I don't take some chemotherapy, I will die. That is a kind of a suicide. I have the intention to die. That is very personal. And only that person really knows. So if somebody is a machine dependent and they want to end their life, you can just turn off the machine. They want to end their life. That's a different way. I want to live, I want to live without machine. Those are two different things. And who knows? Only that person.
And again, talking about consequence, right? Nobody asked about euthanasia yet, but we can bring euthanasia into euthanasia. If you decide to have euthanasia, it's a suicide. All right. You are going to die in 3 months, and you said, I want you to give me the injection. I don't want to wait 3 months. I'm going to die now. It is suicide, because you are choosing to end your life. Again, the consequences of someone dying through euthanasia 3 months before their time, and someone killing oneself when they are full of life at 30 years old, is completely different. Okay. The consequence of someone committing euthanasia, it may be a miscarriage in a future possible tentative of reincarnation, right? The 3 months you stay in 3 months in the belly of a spirit that wants to help you, a mother, and then the mother suffers a miscarriage, and that's the 3 months you own to yourself, right? It's just an example. Could be many other examples. Not that let's not think that all miscarriages are this. There are many other examples, but again, we are going to talk about involuntary suicide later in this chapter also, which is a very large umbrella of many things, right? You can go from what they say here, where someone is insane, it's an involuntary suicide. Someone that smokes their whole life, that knows that smoking is going to kill you, it's an involuntary suicide. André Luiz in the spiritual home in Nosso Lar, everybody calling him a suicide, he doesn't understand why. And finally, he learns because of the abuses in his physical life, he never wanted to die or never tried to commit suicide. So why they were calling him suicide? Well, they were trying to harm him mentally, right? But it was because of his lifestyle that ended up causing the cancer that killed him. So that's why he was being called suicide. It's not really a suicide, not in the sense what we are discussing here, but it is an involuntary suicide if you put that in that big umbrella of involuntary suicide.
John and Elmo, quick question. This is Carol. What about group suicide, such as those who have taken the Kool-Aid, so to speak, and there's more than 10, maybe 15, 100 people or so? Do you think that in the spiritual world they would be gathered together for a group treatment, or would it be, going back to what you had said earlier, the individual will be helped or assisted? It'll be, as you always say, a case is a case. I've always been curious about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. Very good question. Yes, and the young people don't remember the case of Jim Jones and
Jim Jones, Guyana.
like 1,500 people that killed themselves, right, in Guyana, in like 50 years ago. So.
Yeah.
For sure, the leaders won't be together with the others, right? Because those that beside killing themselves, convinced a large number of people to kill themselves also, their responsibility is much bigger, and they're going to find themselves in very difficult places and not with the followers. Now, the followers, they may be like in the place that we find in Memoirs of a Suicide, this colonies for suicides that exist in the spiritual world, that it is said that the responsible for these colonies is Mary, Jesus' mother. The groups that the followers may find themselves together in those places, so they have the opportunity of learning together and overcoming together their challenges, each one with their individual choices. Like in the book Memoirs of a Suicide, it's a group of 6 men together, and they have different experiences, different types of suicides and different experiences. So you have to divide between those that the leaders, and again, in a group like Jim Jones, I'm sure it was him and a group of close followers that lead the others to commit suicide. And I remember reading, if I'm not mistaken, that some that tried to escape were forced or killed or something like that, right? So you have different cases there, right? If someone decides last minute to run away and is killed by someone else, this person is not a suicide. It's a victim of an assassination, right? So you see that you can have a lot of different cases there, Carol. But one thing is for sure, the leaders they will never be with the followers, and they will be facing a much more difficult challenge and much more difficult experience back in the spiritual world.
Thank you. It's very interesting. Thank you so much.
It's still, each case is a case. Always, each case will be a case. And many things to take into consideration. What led you to start following that sect? What led you to go to that country? Did you have the opportunity to live? Were you guided, advised, inspired to live? And you reject all the opportunities to do so. So many things taken into consideration. Now, all the cases to have a strong common denominator, there's the likelihood that they'll be together, but we can't say for sure. But again, you're gonna have to put all those ifs, everything together to create that common denominator. If they do have, maybe they will be able to be together. But as João said, there is a degree of responsibility. They'll definitely will separate some people, like the leaders, the sub-leaders, the ones who was forcing people, the ones who try to convince people. Those are not more aggravated cases. But again, it's always going to be a case by case.
Of course, there were children there, right? So responsibility of the children will be much, if the parents force the children or kill the children or force the children to kill themselves, their responsibility is much smaller also than the leader, right? Because the less you know, the less responsible you are, right? Okay.
João, I have a question.
Thank you, Elmo. Thank you, John.
In this case of voluntary suicide, when you're considering assassination or like subjugation, you categorize within the space of insanity. How is that responsible to going under really deep?
In cases of subjugation, it falls into insanity.
Mhm.
In cases of fascination, you'll be more case by case.
Okay.
Because fascination, you have an ability to reason. You are fascinated, so you are more or less not reasoning, but you still have the ability to reason. Subjugation, you lose the ability to almost lose the ability to choose by yourself. You are blindly following what the spirit is telling you to do. So in that case will be a case of insanity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Still, you will be responsible for subjecting yourself to the process of subjugation. Nothing happens by chance, right? But the responsibility is not like the other suicide. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Next.
9:45. What should we think of people who commit suicide because they are sick of life? Imprudent people. Why did they not seek out useful work? Life would not have seemed so heavy to them.
Yeah, I think this question is very general, right? We know a lot of people that talk about being tired of life and do not commit suicide, and people that at first sign of trouble attempt to commit suicide. And we have to understand also the process of reincarnation, right? The other case of Kardec, the guy that was almost happy to have committed suicide, still knowing the consequence of it, he said that he was a suicide in the previous life, and he came to this present life with the objective of resisting the temptation of committing suicide, but he ended up committing suicide anyway. So a lot of these people that commit suicide, they already been suicides in previous incarnations, and they come to try to overcome. They come because for us to overcome the temptation, we have to face the challenge, right? If you don't face the challenge, you will never know if you have overcome, right? If you quit smoking, it's a simple case. You have to go to a place where everybody's smoking and feel no desire to smoke, or feel the strength to resist the impulse of smoking, to make sure that you have overcome. You know, if you quit smoking and go to a place where there is no one smoking ever, you don't really know if you have overcome the challenge, right? Because you are not facing with the temptation. So a lot of suicides are suicides from previous lives, and these cases that they become bored of their life or sick of their life and end up committing suicide. Probably many cases are like that, and the spirits are saying they're just imprudent people. Why do they not seek out useful work? There is always something that we can do and we can find to be useful to someone else. If we cannot be useful to ourselves, we can be useful to others. That's what Steve Hawking said when he became completely unable to do anything. He said, if I'm not unable to live for myself, I'll dedicate the rest of my life to live for others, and did all the work that he did, right? So there is always those in need of help, and there is always something that we can do for others. Again, all beautiful in theory. When we're struggling with our lives and everything is going wrong, it's not easy to have the clear conscience to make those choices. But the fact that we go through these questions and we think about it is what should be in our minds if we ever find people, or think of go through the experience ourselves, or find people that are going to the experiences. And we have to be, one thing that we read in articles about suicide is that people that threaten a lot many times do not go through with it. Many times they go through with it. So we shouldn't put it in a basket that is all the same. But a lot of people that commit suicide show no signs of it to anybody. They hide very well, and they end up committing suicide and nobody understands why. So we have to keep an eye and see if we can see signs of these things on our loved ones, to see if there is anything we can do to help. We have also to try, if this happens, we have also to try to understand the responsibility, right? Our personal responsibilities, because a lot of people end up feeling guilty and carrying this guilt throughout their lives when they were not necessarily that guilt in the first place. There was nothing they could do to prevent. So it's, again, there is professional help. There is a telephone line you can call here. It's called, I think it's 988, right? Which is the suicide prevention line, that it's available with people that are much more knowledgeable in how to deal with these situations, right? And we here in Spiritism, we can study, talk about it, we can help and counsel, but if someone comes to us with suicidal thoughts, our responsibility is to direct them to medical authorities, people responsible that know how to deal with it, and not try to solve ourselves things that we are not professionally trained to do. Okay. Right. Okay, let's do one more before we end.
946. What should we think of people who resort to suicide to escape from the troubles and disappointments of this world? Poor spirits who lack the courage to bear the unhappiness of life. God helps those who suffer valiantly, but not those who have neither strength nor courage. The struggles of life are trials or atonements, and those who bear them with resignation are happy because they receive a great reward. Those who believe that their well-being is a result of chance or luck are quite unfortunate. Chance or luck, to borrow their expressions, may favor them for a time, but afterwards the emptiness of those words becomes apparent. Are people who drive an unhappy person to commit this desperate act accountable for the consequences of their action? Yes, and it is severe because they have to answer for those actions as for a murder.
Okay, so those that commit suicide to escape troubles and disappointments of this world, conscious, voluntary suicide, will have to face difficult consequences because they didn't have the strength or courage to bear with resignation and acceptance the difficulties of life. And a lot happens. You see cases of suicide with people that lose money or lose loved ones, or the things that happens in our lives that people don't have the strength to overcome. At the time of Kardec, of course, there were those that lost fortunes and killed themselves because they could not bear living below their classes. Still happens today, but we have many different motives for suicide today than that time of Kardec. One thing that the Spirits tells us very direct here on part A is that if you are responsible for someone to committing suicide, meaning you consciously cause the ruin of someone's life, and this person commits suicide, you are guilty of murder, right? It's not direct murder, it's indirect murder, but you have to answer the actions of murder. Again, the person that committed suicide is still responsible for the act of committing suicide according to their level of understanding, of sanity, and all these things. But if you contribute to that, you are also responsible, and you have to answer for, like they say here, as a murder. Okay. Okay, any questions, comments here? Okay, so we are going to continue this next week. Still, there are plenty of questions to go in this item, so we'll come back next week to it. This Saturday, we have a very interesting lecture by the United States Spiritist Federation. It's called Spiritual and Physical Pathogenesis of Diseases. Describes the intricate relationship between the manifestation of physical diseases and the perispirit, based on the Spirit's book and the book Evolution in Two Worlds by André Luiz. Is given by Marco Magalhães this Saturday at 11 a.m. through the United States Spiritist Federation YouTube page, Facebook page, and the International Spiritist Council YouTube page. This Sunday, as I mentioned before, we are going to study chapters 9 and 10 of the book Between Heaven and Earth. If you are curious to know about spiritual colonies for children, that's where we'll be in chapter 8 and 9, meeting Julio, the child that died drowning for the first time. We're going to meet him, and we're going to understand the reasons, and also Antonina's son that died, and it's very interesting, the study and the knowledge of these chapters in this book. Okay. Ben is not here, so I don't know if book club starts this coming Wednesday, but I think it's the other. No, it's the other Wednesday, so no book club yet. Okay, Carol, can you do our final prayer? Thanks.
Yes, sure. Thank you very much, John. Thank you, Elmo. Thank you, Philip, for reading, and thank you, everyone who was able to participate. Infinite Creator and Supreme Intelligence, all goodness, all grace, we give thanks to be together again as brothers and sisters for our studies of the Spirit's book, the topic being of joys and sorrows, fear of death, and the topic of suicide. As we improve ourselves morally, we will find ourselves better prepared for returning to the spiritual world. Our fears of death may arise from early childhood conditioning or imposed religious beliefs. We may fear the actual process of death and the possibility that perhaps we will suffer. Materialists may cling to this world, possessions, relationships, or their physical body. However, Spiritism may help us to develop a better understanding of dying. A suicide will affect the lives of 6 other people. Each suicide will be experienced in a unique way. A case is a case, as we have always heard. Idleness, lack of faith, often excess or overindulgence can be some of the causes that may create the commitment or a committing of suicide. What does give us meaning in life and what fulfills us within? External factors may not bring happiness or usefulness to us. Suicide may appear to be a quick fix. A voluntary suicide is a violation of God's law, the natural law. And of course, we know that suicide, there would be the cause and the consequences of it. There will be, however, fortunately, spiritual assistance in the spirit world. So beforehand, if possible, let us practice proactive and sensitive awareness to others around us, especially our family members. And if we are able to, let us be available to help or at least direct a person to trained professionals who can assist and often prevent a suicide from occurring. We give thanks to the spiritual benefactors and the good spirits for guiding us and inspiring us this evening. May we receive the love, light, and peace of Christ within us. And for our loved ones, the teachers, our directors, the counselors, mediums, the workers, and all who are able to participate, we pray for inner peace and world peace, especially now, and those who are suffering in the spiritual world as well as in the physical world. We pray for our center, SGNY, and for all Spiritist centers throughout the world, that they may grow, they may expand, and be protected 24/7. As we close, we humbly ask for safety and protection as we return to family, friends, loved ones, and coworkers. And may we remind ourselves to be beacons of love, of light, of peace, of service, and charity. So be it. Thank you.